Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, theater, and entertainment. And today, I feel so lucky to be joined by Jessie Barr, who is the writer and director of the movie Sophie Jones, being released by Oscilloscope. And I wanted to start by talking about the writing process, because you actually wrote this with your cousin, Jessica Barr. And it comes from a very personal place for both of you, having gone through a loss that's very similar to your main female character. And so I just wanted to ask about, the emotional connectivity that the two of you had in writing this script together, and possibly whether it was a catharsis for both of you in making this project as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the question. Yeah, it's kind of a strange synchronicity and like a confluence of events. I lost my dad when I was 16, and I never talked about that loss, and I really never confronted it. I think I was sort of surviving, and my coping mechanism was denial for like most of my life. And then I just finally started to feel like it was something I wanted to dance with. It was something, I think I had lived almost as long with him as I'd lived without him. And I started to sort of write about that experience. And it was exactly at that time that my younger cousin, Jessica Barr, who plays Sophie Jones in the film, sent me an early draft of a very raw script inspired by her experiences grieving the loss of her mother. And I think I felt immediately, obviously connected, because I felt this was my story too. I knew this story. I felt I had to tell this story. I felt really connected to the character of Sophie. I felt this responsibility to be who I needed when I was younger. And it was kind of I became a woman possessed. It like wasn't a choice. We just started diving in. She was asking for notes. I gave her notes. We were working on things together, started writing things together, started going up to I realized I needed to make it. I started contacting producers and friends and being like, I know this is insane, but I'm going to make this movie. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't like there was no ulterior motive. It was like this pure soul, heart fire just to tell this story and to reclaim, I think, a narrative that I personally had run from and was really inspired by, my cousin bringing that into my life at that time, and then us just sharing our intimacies with each other in the way that we did.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting the way that you were describing this as being something that you yourself didn't talk about very much for a long time, because that's very much what we see through the movie. And I think one of the things that you capture so beautifully is the way that grief is something that everybody processes in different ways, and it can be something that you really just hold inside of yourselves. So in capturing that in the film, what were the kind of minute ways in which you really wanted to capture that quiet grief, even when it's not through moments of dialogue and she's not sharing anything?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was incorporating, obviously, Jessica has such a deep inner life, and I knew immediately like she had obviously to play this part. It was part of the honesty and the purity of like what we were trying to do. So I was trying to really work with her about, creating that this is a character, although it's like a version of her, it's also something else. I didn't want us to make a documentary. I didn't want us to make a recreation, right? Like this is a piece of cinema, this is a piece of art, but it is from like the fabric of our lives. So part of that was just spending a lot of time with her, filming her with my 5D in our living room, and then sending those shots to my director of photography, Scott Miller, for him to see how I was seeing her, how I was looking at her. Creating a rapport and a level of trust and support so we could be vulnerable with each other. In terms of incorporating that in the film, a lot of it too was when I went and scouted in Portland and seeing these natural spaces. And originally that wasn't in the script, but that was something I wanted to incorporate, is like Portland as a place, and linking narratively the memory of Sophie's mother and nature and Mother Nature and the spirit of her sort of being omnipresent. So a lot of that was incorporating that into the moments with the family. Also in terms of sound, the music and not music. I wanted there to be a lot of silence. I wanted it to feel very tactile and visceral and immersive, like hearing the cloth on the skin, the scraping of wood, or like, the kissing. It was like all the design and the intentionality of that all was sort of wrapped up in what I was trying to do. Yeah.
And you were mentioning Scott Miller just now, your cinematographer on the movie. And I thought it was great that in part of your process in working with him and putting together preparation and giving him such a sense of what you wanted to capture, that some of that beyond just visual references was also sharing things like poetry and music with him as well, to really give him an idea of like the esoteric nature of the film as well. What were some of those elements that you really wanted to just make sure that he understood in the intimacy of how you wanted to tell the story through sharing those types of things with him?
Well, I have to say, just Scott Miller is an incredible director of photography, and he's also been, incredible gaffer for years. And for him to trust me, and to jump in the way he did. He originally was not the person who was going to shoot, but she, of course, in indie film fashion, got a big budget movie. It happens 2 weeks out. I'm losing my mind. And my husband, who's a filmmaker as well, we had shot with Scott on a series we made called City. And so I knew what it was like to be filmed by Scott, to be seen by him as an actor. And so when he recommended my husband reach out to Scott, I was like, of course. And thank God he was available and willing to do it. And we already had like this connection and this bond from having worked together previously. And he's just such a sensitive, empathetic being. I could trust him to look the way I wanted to look and see things the way I wanted to see things, and also trust that he could work with these young actors in really vulnerable, intense situations that required a lot of emotional intelligence, a lot of support, and a lot of reverence. But yes, sharing music with him, sharing photographs. Rania Matar is a photographer that I love. Her references of mothers and daughters was something that was really inspiring to me. Sending him films, journal writings, a lot of poetry from, when I was 16, Gertrude Schnackenberg, and reading like Anne Sexton and Mary Oliver. Obviously, Joan Didion, Year of Magical Thinking is a touchstone, and a lot of films and documentaries. But mostly, too, it was because we had such limited time. In addition to all the research I'd done before and sharing that with him, it was also just about us getting there and looking at the light and seeing the locations and, breathing in the smells to really stay alive and present to what was happening so that we could capture it together.
And you were actually filming in Jessica's home at the time. So how did that actually really help, just in terms of it being a space that you're already familiar with? You know what the light's going to do at different times of the day, and really finding the way that you wanted to visually approach that as a location.
Well, so again, independent film, it's like anytime I've made anything, it's been like, what do I have access to? Whose friend's house can we shoot at? Whose, grandma can cook lunch. So on this day, so in the nature of part of it was by design and part of it was by necessity, right? And part of what I was really felt the need to explore in the story was the truthfulness and the authenticity of it, and to never try to be something it's not, right? It's like, I wanted things to be photographically honest. Like, she's wearing my bras a lot of the time, and clothes in there, and my producer's clothes are in. It's such an enmeshment and amalgamation. But in terms of the house, that was a key location that we knew we had access to. It was limited because it was going to be sold in the fall. So we knew we had to shoot that summer. So there was a lot of pressure in preparation and raising funds, casting, crew, everything. But I was talking to a lot of filmmakers and Lynn Shelton, who I connected with early on, who, when everyone thought I was crazy, she was like, no, just go for it. You can do it. And she was like, if you have your director of photography, if you have your lead actors, you have the big location, you just go for it, just do it. So that really fueled me to do that. And having the house, I had never been to the house before. I'd lived on the East Coast, Jessica lived on the West Coast in Oregon. So when we went, it was my DP, Scott, lived in the house for a while during pre-production. He stayed in the bedrooms. He would send me photographs of the light at night, and we would look at things in the morning. And my uncle was so generous, and also my other cousin, Sarah, we filmed Sophie's bedroom in her bedroom, that attic, because the way the light fell on the floor created this really perfect bounce that actually mirrored the same light I found in my apartment when we rehearsed in LA. And I was like, this is a sign. We have to use this room. The light is bouncing perfectly. The natural light slanting in. So it was really, it was people being generous, opening up their homes and finding ways to make every obstacle actually a resource.
And with those rehearsals that you did at your place beforehand, that was a lot of you just having a camera yourself and filming and trying out a lot of different scenes. And what were some of the discoveries even for you that where you really found the essence of certain scenes or moments within the film from that time?
Yeah, I think the big thing, I come from theater and as an actor. And so it's so important for it to be collaborative to me and for everyone to feel ownership. And even though we were all new, this is just about everyone's first film, I wanted everyone to feel agency. And so a lot of that comes from feeling safe enough to take risks. So in the beginning of rehearsing, in my living room, and then when I took them out for dinner one night and we were all chatting, it's like getting to know who they are and getting to know what type of actor are they? What do they need from me? Do they like to talk a lot about things before? Do they like to be left alone? A lot of times too, it was taking away the pressure of needing to perform, right? Needing to get something right, or this is this moment and I need you to do this exact thing. I'd done a lot of preparation. I sent around this Bible inspired by, the Godfather Bible by Coppola, probably just out of fear, every scene, breaking it down, essence, tone, atmosphere, pitfalls. I also added improvisations I wanted to see. And so when we were working, it was really letting it be an experiment and letting them improvise into scenes, out of scenes. If something felt stale or forced, immediately you can feel it. And so it's let's find another way into this. How else could you say that? And letting it be sort of a collaborative, supported environment to work.
Yeah. And in particular, in working with Jessica, what were the things that you found that she really needed and wanted from you as a director, given that she was part of the entire creation process and knew this character incredibly intimately before you even went into filming?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was permission for this to be a character and a version of herself with things turned up and things turned down. It was also working a lot on her vulnerability, and also working with her as an actor. Talked a lot about could be simple physical things like dropping your jaw and breathing from the back of your heart or the back of your lungs, or allowing yourself to whisper a line and see how it feels in your body and not feeling like you have to push it, but we'll see you. I talked to her a lot about the camera, because it's interesting. We're so used to having cameras in our faces and phones. So you think especially young people are so used to performing for the camera, but that's the exact thing I didn't want. I wanted it to feel like we were a fly on the wall. I wanted to feel like these sort of stolen moments. So it was getting her used to being seen by the camera. And I remember initially there was sort of a lot of turning away. And I remember talking to her and just being letting the camera take you in, letting it receive you and imagining it's someone lovingly looking at you, which takes a lot to really be seen in the way that was required of this film and this character and of the performance, requires a tremendous amount of, bravery. So I'm very proud of her. And I think she just did a tremendous job. And I'm really proud of the work that we did together.
Yeah. And with that idea of one of the things that you were looking at being breathing and just muscle relaxation in scenes, did you find that with your cast overall that you're really also looking at the physical embodiment in that way and what they're holding internally, as well as just the emotional tone of a scene and the essence that they're capturing?
Absolutely. I mean, so much of why I also was drawn to using wonders is seeing the energy of their bodies in real time unfolding in the moment. Again, I think I'm really influenced by theater, and also I was just very overly ambitious and had planned these wonders, and seeing it unfold in real time to help us feel like we're breathing every breath with them, or taking every step with them. And there's something both really freeing about that, and also really claustrophobic and kind of terrifying, which I think, was something that I really was envisioning for the film. But yeah, I think my brain went off. Can you repeat again that question?
It's all good. Really just about the way that with that idea of with Jessica, how you were looking at the tensity of her muscles and having her relax and just focus on breathing, and how that
Yes.
impacted the way that you were looking at moments and scenes and emotional essence with the rest of the cast.
Yeah, with the rest of the cast too, it was like looking at what they organically were bringing and what their essence was and trying to fold that in seamlessly into the film. And also, yeah, especially with a lot of the intimate scenes, talking a lot about breath and relaxation, and in order to find a rhythm together. And yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You know, and you were talking about the intimacy of the way that the camera really looks at her and the other characters as well. And the way that you made a lot of camera choices, and particularly the motion that it has, you know, even when it's something as simple on the surface level of her sitting in a field having a conversation with her friend, you really use the camera with this like slow motion, kind of just really observing and making us feel like we're listening into their conversation and that we're actually there. And so I wanted to ask you about the choices that you made to really capture that essence in so many different scenes in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think working with Scott, again, it was really a collaboration with the two of us. I always knew going in, for multiple reasons, it had to be handheld, which is also incredibly demanding. You know, it's incredibly physical. It was, a crazy 15-day shoot, mad dash, so physical all the time. It's a lot of work. But I knew that because of the nature of the sort of world we were building, it needed to feel that alive. It needed to feel like it was breathing. It needed to feel documentary-esque, but also something sort of heightened, like a fable. And so having the camera be something that is dancing with them and feeling them in real time, like Scott feeling them and watching, what the emotion is that's happening and making micro adjustments. It's a really technically difficult thing to do. And I think he made it look really easy. And that is a testament to his skill as a director of photography and his sensitivity,
Yeah.
So
There's also moments where you really flip what you're doing with the camera and use it to create a very different type of energy. Like when Sophie's going into her bedroom and starting to hook up, and there's suddenly a really frenetic energy to the way that the camera is moving around, and it's capturing your character's energy as well. So, with the fact that you had it as such kind of like a guidingly intimate way in the majority of the film, how did you then want to create these moments like that, which really juxtaposed it and created a completely different type of energy and captured something so different tonally in the film?
I think when we were filming, it was always like, what is the honesty of this moment, and not feeling like we had to prescribe to a set thing that was the decision. It was like trying to be as honest in the moment to capture what we needed in that moment. And then in the edit with my editor, Naomi Sunrise Filamaro, who is absolutely incredible and just a true queen and amazing collaborator. I'm so grateful that she said yes to this film and we got to work together on this. We really crafted a lot of that in the edit. It was playing with also embracing like the non-linear. I mean, it's always moving forward in time, but we do skip time, right? And it is vignette, and we're playing with the juxtaposition of like jump cuts and very intentional, rough, abrupt like exits, which creates this sort of sense of fragmentation and disorientation that's really also, I think, emblematic of grief as well. We were like thinking, what is the shape in terms of cinema, in terms of the grieving process? Like, what does that structure look like? So a lot of that in the edit was sort of balancing these very long one-ers that feel very fluid and sort of, aqueous, and then having the jump cuts that feel really abrupt and disruptive and uncomfortable. And what that does also to an audience, it creates this feeling of like chaos and being in the grieving process.
Yeah. And then overall, in terms of the way that you capture that experience and that moment in time of being a young teenage girl, when you're 16, I'm thinking about the moment where Sophie and her friend have a complete falling out, and you really make sure that you capture the essence of reality and constantly keep it grounded rather than playing it for drama. It's not something where the two of them are raising their voices and shouting at each other. And it almost feels like neither of them are entirely sure why they're not friends at the end of that conversation, because it started as something completely different, which is very realistic. And I feel like you make choices like that a lot of times where you really pulled it back and stripped it down. Was that a really conscious thing, or was that something that you really just found in the moment in shooting the scenes with them?
I think it was always a conscious thing. Again, I think I really just was holding to truth and honesty, like in every way, in terms of performance. Yeah, not feeling people had to push, because then it just feels artificial. It feels false. And it is like that in relationships, right? It's like you get into a fight and you're not sure what you said. And now all of a sudden there's a strange energy and you're not sitting with her anymore and you feel really hurt. But also I wanted to capture the reality of that, all the awkwardness, all the sort of like in between moments that aren't neat. It's not tied up. That was a lot too in the script and, Jessica's original draft, like honoring that was really important to me. And then especially that scene with her and Claire, that was something also that we worked on a lot, this idea of pleasure and female pleasure. And I know this isn't directly correlated to your question, but I think it's worth saying that, feeling like you have to do something for someone else, and very rarely are young women especially taught to prioritize their pleasure. So in that argument, Claire thinks she's protecting her by telling her, hey, people are talking about you. Do you even like what you're doing? Are you getting pleasure and enjoyment? And then Sophie feels off guard and confronted by that and sort of stripped by that comment. And so she turns it back on her. It's like, well, do you? And then of course, Claire feels flustered because no, I don't think maybe she doesn't, that turned it on her in a really interesting way. And then they're both sort of at a loss. So yeah, it was really important to keep that obviously on a script level and then also in the filming of it.
There's another scene in which I felt like in a very different way, you also took something that could have been overly dramatized and really kept it at the emotionally raw level, which is when Sophie's asked to give a ride home to another girl who shares that she's lost one of her parents. And the two of them are just sitting in the car very quietly. And that's kind of one of the first times that Sophie feels like she can really talk about things out loud because it's somebody that understands what she's been going through this entire time. And within that, again, you're not having them completely break down. It's not that kind of like raw emotional women scene that we see in a lot of movies. You kept it still very quiet and intimate. And so I wanted to just ask about the journey of finding the tone within that particular scene for that reason.
Yeah, that scene was really, again, it was all about giving them time and playing against like the emotion and really being present with the other person. And not worrying about, again, performing an outcome, but really just listening and responding, which is a lot harder than it sounds. And that scene actually was, again, building on chemistry that was already there. Elle Lane, who played Lily, and Jessica, who plays Sophie, my cousin, they were friends. And this was inspired by her actual experience of having lost her mom. So that was a real shared moment that the two of them had. Elle Lane and my cousin. And so they both had that experience. So it was really about imagining that sort of all our ghosts were in the car with us, and just letting them sit in that and feel like the presence of their lost ones in there, and then being able to just breathe and look at each other and respond to each other. And we did a few takes in that more classic coverage for that scene. It's one of the also only scenes where we really see, it's a different lens we use too. And we see Sophie, really most of her face like straight on. Whereas a lot of times in the film, you're not seeing her look straight directly at camera, right? There's a lot of sort of like, you can't really get inside her head completely. And in that moment, you really do see her and you see her see another person. And actually, for a while, that scene was not in the cut. Naomi and I tried without it. But we put it back in because it was so important that that's one of the only moments in the film where you see her sort of come outside of herself and help another person through their experience. So it's that sort of compassionate reaching out to another in pain that felt really important to capture.
And with that idea of just allowing the two of them to just really sit there and take it in and find their space, I believe that you actually gave them a bunch of time before you even went into filming, where it was just the two of them sitting in the car with each other and having that moment with the cameras not present yet. Were there any other scenes where you really took time like that beforehand, or was it very unique to that scene because of what it was asking of the both of them?
I'm trying to think. Everything was so crazy on the 15-day shoot. It was like, I think the prep was really important with Jessica and I, and that's where we did a lot of our time in the notes and writing and, being together. And on the days where there were more emotional things that I knew were necessary, yes, it was really important to give time If there were certain things like blocking that, we knew we had to do, I would go in just with, the actor and with Scott, and we would sort of talk through things. Well, first it was always just me and the actors, and then Scott would come in, and but keeping it really small so that it didn't feel like there were a bunch of people around them, right? Again, keeping it very simple and intimate, so that it didn't feel like a lot of pressure. And then when we were rolling, there's no yelling, there's no like, all these people, it's like, all right, let's go ahead whenever. And I would always, whenever you're ready, so it sort of feels like the next moment falls out of whatever the rehearsal was, or out of this space that we had created. So there was no, clear, like, go now, you're on, and I think that lends itself to hopefully really vulnerable and tuned in performances.
You also do a really wonderful job of capturing that idea in the way that Sophie feels very disconnected from people, even when she's in a room full of people. And, there's a couple of instances where she's at house parties at other people's places and she's completely surrounded, but you find ways to kind of like steal her away and just create that disconnect. And so within those scenes, what were the ways in which you really wanted to approach capturing that?
Yeah, it was so crazy having all those parties. We did them in like 3 days in a row, and everyone was just so generous, and having all that energy was so wild. But it really was then finding ways to isolate, Jessica as Sophie, and finding ways to really casually show that her energy is elsewhere. So a lot of that was just, blocking, like choosing different vignettes of like, okay, they're all together, but let's have her on the end. And then a lot of her, intuiting what else could we use here that would help, serve that in the story. There also was a line that Jessica had written about Sophie saying she loved like being in doorways, which I think we ended up cutting, but like that stayed with me, this idea of like, oh, she's always on the edge of frame, or she's always sort of like trying on the threshold of trying to get out. So that was something that I really tried to infuse in the film visually.
And then as well as making this feature film, you've also been developing and working on and shooting and have produced a bunch of other projects. And within that have been part of the Sundance Labs and been a fellow there twice. And, everyone who comes out of that experience just talks about what an incredible experience it is and the insight that they get. And so for you personally, what are the things and the tools and the skills that you feel that you really got the opportunity to enhance in the way that with the projects that you took there, you feel like it really developed them and helped you to find the voice of what they needed to be?
Thank you. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. We just finished the lab yesterday. We had like a closing ceremony, and it was like all day. And I was like, I didn't even post about the movie till like, today at like 4:00. And it's like, oh, you just have to let go. You just have to let go and be imperfect. But the lab really changed my life, and I'm not, being hyperbolic. The project that we went into with my friend Lena Hudson and I had made a short film together called Too Long at the Fair that we wrote, directed, and starred in together. And that we wrote a pilot inspired by that ended up getting into the lab for the Makers Lab and then the Episodic Lab. And I think one of the biggest things was just learning about television, the business of television, learning about writers' rooms, how they work, getting to read so many different people's work and their voices, and practicing like collaborating and giving them notes and thoughts and helping them flesh out ideas was just so inspiring. And I think the biggest thing is just feeling, especially when you've been working for a long time on your own and feeling really unsupported, for Sundance to, see you and to feel that support as an artist and to feel like your voice matters is really, really powerful. And they have such a generous spirit there, and all the mentors, and it's really a special place, special program. So I'm very grateful.
Well, that's so fantastic to hear that it was that experience for you as well. And congratulations on everything with the movie. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mara, for talking.